The glass door of my cabin slammed open with such force that the antique bell I'd hung there for decoration flew off and rolled across the hardwood floor. Margaret Blackstone stood in my doorway, her perfectly manicured finger already pointing at me like she was identifying a suspect in a police lineup. Her voice hit a pitch that made my golden retriever whimper and hide behind the couch. "This entire property is in violation of HOA Regulation 7.3 subsection B, she shrieked, waving a clipboard that looked like it had seen more battles than a military field manual. Her face was turning that particular shade of purple I'd come to associate with her most dramatic performances. What Margaret didn't realize was that she had just burst into my private meeting with retired federal judge Harold Watkins, 2 property law attorneys from the city, and a notary public who had driven up specifically to witness some documents we were signing. The 4 men at my dining table turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from bewilderment to barely suppressed amusement. Judge Watkins slowly removed his reading glasses and fixed Margaret with the same look he'd probably given countless defendants over his 30-year career on the bench. His voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority when he spoke. "Ma'am, unless you're here with a valid warrant or you're planning to confess to criminal trespassing, I strongly suggest you remove yourself from this property immediately." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked at the judge, then at the lawyers, then back at me. Her face somehow managed to turn an even deeper shade of purple as she sputtered something about unauthorized firewood placement and exterior paint violations. Then she spun on her designer heels and stormed out, but not before shouting that this wasn't over. As the door slammed behind her, Attorney Michael Garrison chuckled and shook his head. "Well, that was certainly dramatic. I take it that's the HOA president you've been telling us about." I nodded, unable to suppress my own grin. After months of dealing with Margaret's escalating harassment, she had just handed me the perfect ammunition. And she didn't even know it yet. "My name is David Sinclair, and I'm a 42-year-old software engineer who bought a cabin in Pine Ridge Valley about 12 years ago. It was my escape from the chaos of city life, a place where I could write code in peace during the week and host friends for barbecues on weekends. The property came with 5 acres of pristine woodland, a small pond, and absolutely zero HOA restrictions when I purchased it. For the first 10 years, life at the cabin was perfect. I installed solar panels to reduce my carbon footprint, built a small greenhouse where I grew heirloom tomatoes, and even set up a few beehives that produced the most amazing wildflower honey you've ever tasted. My nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile away, and we all respected each other's privacy while still being friendly enough to help out when needed. Everything changed when the Silverwood Heights HOA expanded its territory 2 years ago. Led by Margaret Blackstone, a former corporate compliance officer who apparently missed having people to terrorize after her early retirement, the HOA absorbed several previously unincorporated areas, including Pine Ridge Valley. Margaret took her role as HOA president with the seriousness of a military commander preparing for war. The first time I met Margaret, she showed up at my door with a measuring tape and a camera, informing me that my mailbox was 3 inches too tall according to the new community standards. When I politely explained that my mailbox had been there for a decade and was grandfathered in, she laughed in my face and told me I had 72 hours to comply or face fines. That was just the beginning. Over the next 18 months, Margaret found problems with everything about my property. My solar panels were aesthetically displeasing, despite being on the back of the roof where nobody could see them. My beehives were potential liability hazards, even though they were 100 feet from the property line. My greenhouse was not an approved structure, despite being built with proper permits from the county years before the HOA existed. The harassment escalated from annoying to borderline illegal. I started finding notes taped to my trees when I returned from work, each one detailing new violations she discovered during her routine inspections. The problem was, I'd never given her permission to enter my property, and Pine Ridge Valley didn't have common areas that would justify her presence. I installed security cameras after finding footprints in my greenhouse one morning. What they captured over the next few weeks was beyond anything I'd expected. Margaret was entering my property multiple times per week while I was at work. She photographed everything from the arrangement of my firewood stack to the interior of my shed through the windows. One particularly creepy video showed her actually testing the door handles on my cabin to see if they were locked. The recordings also captured her bringing potential buyers to view my property, telling them it would soon be available after the HOA seized it for non-compliance. She promised one couple that my 5 acres would make a perfect location for a new community center, describing in detail how my cabin would be demolished to make way for a swimming pool and tennis courts. I consulted with a lawyer friend who told me I had grounds for a restraining order, but I decided to document everything first. I created a detailed log of every trespass, every false violation notice, and every lie she told the neighbors about me. She was telling people I was running an illegal honey operation, that my cabin was a fire hazard, and my favorite, that I was planning to turn the property into an off-grid survivalist compound. The situation reached a breaking point when Margaret sent me an official notice stating that the HOA board had voted to fine me $500 per day for my continuing violations, retroactive to the date of the first warning 18 months ago. The total came to over $200,000. The letter also stated that failure to pay within 30 days would result in the HOA placing a lien on my property and beginning foreclosure proceedings. That's when I called my old college roommate, Harold Watkins. Harold had recently retired from the federal bench after a distinguished career and was looking for interesting cases to consult on. When I explained my situation and sent him the documentation I'd compiled, he was on the road to my cabin within hours, bringing 2 colleagues who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. We spent 3 days going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. What we discovered was shocking, even to these seasoned legal professionals. Not only had Margaret been violating multiple state and federal laws with her trespassing and harassment, but the HOA expansion that supposedly gave her authority over Pine Ridge Valley had never been properly filed with the state. The board minutes she claimed showed a vote to include our area were forgeries. She'd been operating under completely fabricated authority for 2 years. We were in the middle of drafting cease and desist letters when Margaret made her dramatic entrance. Judge Watkins later told me it was one of the most brazen displays of entitlement he'd witnessed in 40 years of legal practice. After she left, attorney Michael Garrison pulled up the criminal code on his laptop and started listing the charges Margaret had just added to her growing collection. Criminal trespass, breaking and entering, harassment, intimidation, and false representation of authority were just the beginning. We filed for an emergency restraining order that afternoon. The judge who reviewed it was so concerned by the evidence that he not only granted it immediately but also referred the case to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Margaret was served with the restraining order at the next HOA board meeting in front of all the board members and several dozen residents. The process server had to repeat himself 3 times because she kept screaming over him about her authority as HOA president. The story exploded on social media after someone at the meeting recorded her meltdown and posted it online. The video of Margaret screaming, "I am the law in this neighborhood," while being handed legal documents went viral within days. Local news picked it up, and reporters started digging into her background. They discovered this wasn't her first rodeo. She'd been removed from 2 previous HOA boards in other states for similar behavior. The other board members quickly distanced themselves from Margaret, claiming they had no knowledge of her unauthorized actions. Several residents came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. One elderly couple revealed that Margaret had tried to force them to remove a wheelchair ramp because it wasn't made of approved materials. Another family shared recordings of Margaret measuring their grass with a ruler at 6 o'clock in the morning. The criminal investigation revealed the full extent of Margaret's fraud. She'd been collecting fines from residents for violations that didn't exist, depositing the money into a personal account she claimed was for HOA emergency funds. She'd forged documents, falsified meeting minutes, and even created a fake HOA website where she posted increasingly bizarre regulations that she made up on the spot. The day of her criminal trial was something I'll never forget. Margaret showed up in a power suit, still convinced she could talk her way out of it. She tried to represent herself, which Judge Watkins later told me was the most entertaining legal disaster he'd ever witnessed. She actually argued that as HOA president, she had sovereign immunity from prosecution. The judge had to take a recess because the court reporter was laughing too hard to continue typing. When the verdict came down, Margaret's world finally came crashing down around her. Guilty on all counts, 12 counts of criminal trespass, 6 counts of fraud, 3 counts of forgery, and 1 count of felony harassment. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, 2 years suspended pending good behavior, 2,000 hours of community service. Specifically helping elderly residents with property maintenance, and ordered her to pay restitution of $375,000 to all the residents she defrauded. Margaret's jaw dropped so far, I thought it might hit the defense table. She actually asked the judge if he was joking. When he assured her he was not, she fainted and had to be carried out on a stretcher while the entire courtroom erupted in applause.